So obviously, Megan and I talk a lot about cultural diversity in the workplace, particularly as that relates to the tech industry. One aspect that we haven't discussed much at all is neurodiversity, and we're joined by Vauhini Vara from Fast Company to do just that. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to get you back. So first of all, tell us a little bit about the term neurodiversity. What is that exactly?
Sure. So neurodiversity is a term that was coined about 20 years ago by somebody who was on the autism spectrum, and it's really taken off and become more widespread or widely known since then. What it means is it conveys the notion that people who think differently, including people who might have what we think of as brain disorders like autism, are not abnormal. They represent normal ways of thinking that are just outside of the mainstream, and that should be respected just the same way that gender diversity or racial diversity should be respected.
Sure. So you wrote an excellent piece on Fast Company. I definitely implore everyone that watches and listens to this show to definitely check it out and read up on it. One of the things specifically that you get into, I mean, it's kind of the basis for this around neurodiversity, is kind of the challenges that someone who, let's say, is on the autism spectrum faces when interviewing with, let's say, a technology company. They've got a lot of knowledge locked away, but maybe their social skills aren't kind of on par with translating that knowledge across. What exactly are some of those challenges that they face, let's say, in an interview scenario?
So oftentimes the challenges have more to do really with how people with autism might communicate than with the way they're really processing information. And so what might happen, for example, is that somebody with autism might be more likely to look at his hands when he's being asked interview questions, which out of context might seem rude or like it conveys poor social skills at the very least. But if you're interviewing this person and you know they have autism, and you as an interviewer have been trained to understand what it means to have autism, you'd recognize that this is just a feature of their autism and doesn't necessarily convey something negative about who this person is. Right. That's just one example.
Mm-hmm. So what, if any, are the laws about discriminating against someone in the workplace who has autism?
So autism is considered a disability, so it would sort of fall under the bucket of conditions that companies are prohibited from discriminating against because they are disabilities. But that said, as you know, as with any kind of diversity, whether it's diversity in race or gender or other disabilities, there are plenty of ways that an employer might unintentionally discriminate or have unconscious biases against a candidate because he or she has autism. And that's really hard to quantify. You know, you can't, it would be hard for a potential candidate to sue an employer saying you discriminated against me in many cases, because in cases in which that discrimination was somehow unconscious or not overt.
Sure. So a large part of what you're talking about in the article has to do with Microsoft specifically as a company. You know, they're basically putting pieces into place to make a more hospitable environment, to basically get at that knowledge and break through kind of the social aspects that can keep, you know, people on the autistic spectrum out of a position like this, and really kind of understand the knowledge that they have. How does Microsoft tackle knowing, I guess, first and foremost, that they have an autistic candidate? I mean, is it lawful for them to ask? How do they know to put these pieces in place for them?
That's a good question. So what Microsoft has actually done with this particular program is it has essentially sent out a call for applications from people who are autistic explicitly. Okay. So there's a web page that you can go to if you're autistic and want to work at Microsoft. And so it's looking for applicants specifically who have autism, who are willing to disclose that they have autism. That's all fully legal. What becomes more interesting is that Microsoft is talking about wanting to scale this so that it's not just a sort of individual program, but that these practices are things that they take into account throughout the organization. And so that becomes more interesting because that means that they want to sort of be cognizant of neurodiversity issues and the facts of neurodiversity when they're interviewing candidates in general. So outside of this program, you're right, they wouldn't be able to ask a candidate, hey, do you have autism? In that case, I'm going to ask you this set of different questions. But just being aware that people think and communicate differently, I think, is meant to teach hiring managers that they should keep an open mind about the way people portray themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we talk about hiring for diversity, the argument always is, well, we don't want to lower the bar. So tell me some of the strengths that people with autism have that they can bring to this workplace.
Absolutely. So I don't want to generalize, but what people at Microsoft told me is that they have found that many candidates that they have seen with autism tend to be detail-oriented, tend to be methodical, tend to be very conscientious, tend to not want to cut corners. Again, these are generalizations, but these are things that Microsoft and other companies that I've talked with have found in these candidates. And this is what some people with autism have told me about themselves. So yes, these are strengths, not weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. So I guess obviously Microsoft has put a lot of pieces into place. We haven't really talked at all about what they are doing differently in this process. How are they tackling this?
So let's say I'm a candidate with autism. What I do is I can apply to this program, this special Microsoft program, through a web page. If I seem to meet some basic qualifications, I'll generally get a phone screening in which somebody who's trained, who knows how to talk to people with candidates with autism, will call me up. We'll talk for a half hour. And this person in the HR office will know that, if I'm stumbling over my words a little bit, or if it takes me a while to formulate my answer, that shouldn't be held against me. What they're really trying to figure out is, do I have the skills and am I in the professional readiness? Then I go into Microsoft for 2 weeks with about 15 other candidates. They're running this now several times a year. And basically they put you in a room. They put me in a room with all these other candidates, give us a project to work on together in small groups. And by doing that, they can sort of see how people work together and work individually without it being a sort of high stakes, high pressure situation where, you're walking into a room with 10 managers and they're giving you a coding test to do on the spot. And then managers will come into this room over the course of a couple of weeks and just chat casually with the candidates, which again is a sort of lower pressure way to achieve the same goals on Microsoft's part, which is to learn who these people are, what their strengths are, what they're like as individuals, personality-wise, what their coding skills are like. And so essentially, to sum it up, and at the end of this process, there is a sort of more formal interview process. And then the Microsoft managers who are part of the program get together and decide who they want to give offers to. And so it's a way to kind of accomplish the same things in an interview process that the standard interview process accomplishes, but in a way that is better catered toward the way autistic people are going to communicate and think.
Sure.
I love how you really talk about how this isn't just for the people with autism. I mean, this is to make a more diverse workforce, to make, Microsoft, the people creating these products, be more like the people that are using the products. And so it's Absolutely. A real advantage. Who is this coming from? Is it coming from Nadella? Like who planned this program?
That's a good question. What really interested me about this program before I even started reporting on it is knowing that the CEO, Satya Nadella, has a couple of children with special needs. So it seems to me that he's particularly attuned to these kinds of issues. The two executives who spearheaded this effort, though, happen to have autistic children, which is very interesting because when I spoke to an organization that works with companies that are trying to create these kinds of programs, the representative of the organization told me, you know what, oftentimes when these programs get started at companies, it is because there's a parent who works at the company or is a high-level executive at the company who happens to have a child with autism and wants to see these programs exist and succeed. And so these two executives sort of took it upon themselves to create this little pilot program a year ago, a very scrappy little pilot program without many resources. And it was successful. And so it's been expanded and expanded again. They're still running it on a pretty small budget. It's a relatively small program when you compare it to Microsoft's spending overall. But because of the nature of the program, it's attracting a lot of attention among autistic adults who are interested in these kinds of jobs and is potentially very influential.
Yeah, I have to imagine also, hopefully, like talking about scale, if Microsoft can prove that there's this is a system that works and that it does increase kind of the diversity inside the workplace, the perspective, that kind of light that's shown on all of their products, then that could hopefully be influential to other companies. Is there any kind of take up on this concept, on this approach outside of Microsoft right now?
The other big company to mention is SAP. SAP, another big software company, actually started doing this before Microsoft did. It has a pretty sizable program, and other companies are looking at hiring autistic people, but it's not a concept that has become widespread in Silicon Valley. I'd say companies are still. They first started spending a lot of time looking at gender diversity. Now they're looking at racial diversity. And frankly, as you know, these are problems that haven't been solved in Silicon Valley. And so I think as companies kind of prioritize their where to spend their resources, they're looking at those areas. And this idea of neurodiversity hasn't caught on in a big way yet. Although I do hear that there are several big companies that are starting to take notice.
Excellent. Well, I definitely, those of you watching and listening, definitely recommend checking out the article, Vauhini Vara with fastcompany.com. And the subject, of course, Blake, who we didn't even mention during this interview. And basically the entire article is all about Blake, who seemed like an incredible individual. I know you spent a lot of time with him.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. I love one of the things he said, actually, just real quick before we go. He said that autistic people can, quote, drive towards something to the point of obsession. And when I read that, I was like, that's a quality that everybody wants to have in the workplace. Right? Like, that's a quality you want in your team. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Vauhini Vara with fastcompany.com. Thank you so much. You're at Vauhini Vara on Twitter as well?
That's right.
Excellent. All right. Have a great evening. We'll see you later.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.